All right, you guys, how you doing? We survived another NFL draft. And maybe we more than survived it. Maybe we thrived in this NFL draft. Welcome to Seahawks Forever. I'm Dan. Coming up next, what else? I will be giving you a full recap of the draft, my thoughts on each and every pick, my thoughts on the class as a whole. We'll talk about the process, talk about some common threads that ran through this draft. There was definitely a theme here at work. Whether I liked it or not, if you follow me on Twitter, I think I tweeted about 500 times today. You certainly will know how I feel. And then earlier than most years, we have a pretty clear picture of what the undrafted free agent class looks like. We'll look at that too. That's coming up next on Seahawks Forever. Let's go.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
All right, welcome back, you guys. We survived it. Right before I went live, I was going over some comments from yesterday's show, and I try to read as many of those and respond to as many of them as I can. And one of you said, "Man, you look tired, bro." Yeah, it's been a heavy lift. I think 9 total hours of live streaming over the last couple of days. Thanks to all of you for watching and engaging. I see you out there, and the draft has become such a big event. We see it now and how the league moves it around. It has made it a huge entertainment event. Just the massive crowd at the draft in Green Bay. Unbelievable what the draft has become from, I am old enough to remember when it was held. It wasn't even televised, of course, but you would see video of it later sometimes. Even when they started televising it, though, it was held in hotel ballrooms, and they would use overhead projectors. I tweeted it out the other day. There's an old YouTube link when back when Pete Rozelle was the NFL commissioner, even before Paul Tagliabue. And they used overhead projectors. And I've seen some archival footage even where they're writing picks on whiteboards. So, fast forward 40 years and you see what the draft has become. And just a reminder, too, on Schneider's radio show the other day, Bob Stelton asked, like, hey, is there a chance that the draft could be in Seattle someday? I mean, if it's in Green Bay, if you're concerned about weather, it could certainly be in Seattle. And Dave Pearson, who's the director of communications for the Seahawks, he gave a thumbs up. That was the indication we got. So, there have been reports in the past that the Seahawks have put in applications. You would think at some point, just with the fan support and everything else in Seattle, and certainly we can beat the heck out of what Green Bay can offer when it comes to hotel space and those kinds of things. But even just from a facility standpoint, right? The last couple of events have been held out in public places, like not even at the stadium. Obviously, in Green Bay, it was outside Lambeau Field, but in Kansas City last year, I think it was in a big downtown park. And so, there have been suggestions of, potentially using T-Mobile Park in case the weather's inclement. You can close the roof. But Bryce Coots the other night on the show suggested, you'd probably want to hold it in Seattle Center. You could use Key Arena. I'm sorry, it's not Key Arena anymore. It's Climate Pledge, but hold it outside there in kind of the big open space there outside of Climate Pledge and under the Space Needle and everything else that goes along with it. I think that would be the call. So certainly that would be fun someday. But we have a draft to talk about tonight. Before we get into it, of course, if you don't subscribe to the show, please do. I was looking at some analytics the other day, and about 50% of you that regularly watch the channel aren't subscribed. It doesn't cost you anything. Just hit that subscribe button. That way, when you log into YouTube or you check it out, it'll at least come up in your For You and in your suggestions. But if you really don't want to miss any content, hit that bell. You'll always be notified anytime I post anything or go live. And then, of course, if you'd like to support the show in any other more tangible ways, all of the ways you can do that are linked and described down below in the description. All right, let's get into this. So first of all, let's take a little look back to Monday, my final mock draft, which I try to do as a predictive mock, taking everything into account. Buzz, reports, 30 visits, Seahawk tendencies, characteristics of the players, personality, need, obviously. Last year, I got the Byron Murphy pick. I almost got the Christian Haynes pick. I had Dominic Pooney going at 81. He went 5 picks behind, but I got the right position. This year, big, fat goose egg. Wait a minute. No, I'm showing you the wrong graphic. Oh, see, that's how long this week has been. I looked down at the bottom. I was like, I got the Ricky White pick right. Of course, if you watch the show for any length of time, that Kenneth Grant has been my guy all the way through the process. And so even with the Matt Miller report, and although that came after Monday, I guess, but there was so much buzz leading up to this week that I was tempted to flip the pick to Gray Zabel. I just thought, at the end of the day, I thought the history, the tradition of interior offensive line not being valued by the league as much. Those guys tend to go in the back half of the first round. And just the way this draft class shaked out, I like the idea of going with a really dynamic interior defensive tackle to pair with Byron Murphy and really bank on the upside of Kenneth Grant, and knowing that we could turn around in the second round and get a plug-and-play starter at guard. But that's not how it worked out, obviously. Grant, Higgins, Ratledge, Oladejo, who was one of my must-have guys, didn't get him. Chase Lunt, who I had going in the third round just because I didn't think he'd be there until the fourth. He actually, I think, ended up going in the fifth round. Lathan Ransom went in the fourth round. I got some pushback when I posted this draft that was a reach. He ends up going in the fourth round. Kobe Bryant, who was drafted. Haven't seen where he signed yet, but not with Seattle as an undrafted free agent. Jalen Conyers was not signed or not drafted either. And then Jay Higgins, Brady Cook to finish things out. So that's what I predicted. This is what we ended up with. Of course, if you haven't seen the full recap of night 1 and night 2, you can check that out that was posted yesterday. Gray Zabel, of course, in the first round. Nick Emenwari, the Seahawks traded way up in the second round to get him. It sounds like, although Schneider didn't say it in exact words, they had a first round grade on him the night before. In the press conference to discuss the first round pick, he caught himself before he slipped up, but it sounded like when he was describing how many good players were left on the board that he was about to say, in fact, there are some guys that we have first round grades on. But he did say, we feel like we got 2 first round draft picks. And it certainly sounds like Mike McDonald was asked about it again today in the post draft press conference about his role, that he's got some work to do to learn how to be a deep safety. That's not the strength of his game at this point. He certainly has the athleticism to do it, but the instincts aren't really there. That was kind of the knock on him. That's why he didn't end up ultimately going in the first round, even though he had, as John Schneider described it, the best combine I've ever seen. But Mike McDonald has a role for him, has a plan, has a vision. It sounds like he's going to use him very much in the same way that he used Kyle Hamilton in Baltimore to such great success. Use him in the box, have him as a big nickel and a slot, and sometimes even a weak side linebacker in coverage, taking tight ends and running backs. I talked yesterday about how that's could kind of end up being a 2-for-1 pick in a sense, because it could allow you to play Devin Witherspoon more on the boundary instead of taking the punishment that it requires to play inside as much as they do. And then Elijah Arroyo, I'm going to get that right. It's not Arroyo, it's Arroyo, the super dynamic pass catching tight end at pick number 50. And then Jalen Milroe, of course, we've gone over that. If you want my reaction to that, that's on the show yesterday, but also go back 2 weeks, and I posted it again on Twitter yesterday, where I did an entire episode on why Jalen Milroe would make sense for the Seahawks. So today, in the 4th round, Riley Mills, the defensive end or defensive lineman, he can move around a little bit. He can reduce down inside as well. But they're referring to him as a defensive end out of Notre Dame. Torrey Horton, the wide receiver out of Colorado State. We'll talk about kind of how that all went down. Robbie Oates of Alabama, who was a tight end there. He wasn't their featured tight end. C.J. Dupree was. But Oates, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, they list as a fullback. Really interesting fullback conversion candidate. We knew they were going to be targeting that in the draft. Bryce Cabaldo, a guy who is an elite athlete that we knew they had in for a 30 visit, and there were some reports that they really liked him. And then 3 7th-round picks. You see some of the additional picks here. There was some maneuvering and some trading down. We'll get to that in a second. Damian Martinez, running back out of Miami. Mason Richmond, the tackle out of Iowa. Initially, when he was drafted, it sounded like guard, but we'll explain that. And then Ricky White, they double dip at wide receiver. Very productive receiver out of the Mountain West at UNLV. So they take 2 Mountain West receivers. Before we get into kind of a prospect by prospect, I just want to go back a little bit and look at a couple things. This was my stick and pick list. If the Seahawks had stayed at 18, Gray Zabel is there. These were my hot takes when I did the hot take episode. We kind of had a lot of fun with this with Mitch and Josh from the 12 Talk podcast over in London. I thought they would draft 2 defensive tackles because there's certainly a need there. Riley Mills can play some defensive tackle and indeed will move around the line a little bit. So they drafted 1. This is still a concern. And something we're going to have to monitor over the next week or so. Schneider and McDonald addressed that today in the press conference. There's more work to be done. There's some other ways that you can skin that cat. And then I said running back earlier than you think. And for a minute, I thought I was going to end up looking really good on that prediction, because this running back class that was so vaunted and praised, and I think Daniel Jeremiah said he had 33 starter grade or 33 draftable running back grades, which is much higher than normal. But because there were so many, because there was so much quality there, it kind of got pushed down. You know, teams sort of waited on the position because they knew they could sort of double back around because of all the depth. And so some of those guys lasted longer than they were expected to. I thought Damian Martinez was going to be a 4th or 5th round draft pick. Seahawks get him in the 7th round. And then if you remember my positional ranking series a few weeks ago, where I went position group by position group, and I gave you my top 5 for every position group of players at any point in the draft. They could have been at any range 1 through 7 that I just really liked and felt like fit Seattle well. And I did pretty well on this. Here's my safety group. Nick Emenwari was number 1 out of the 5. If you recall, I didn't like the idea of drafting him at 18 because of some of the development curve that's still not there. He's not a complete player. He's not a great deep coverage safety. There's some instinctive things that some scouts feel are lacking. There's some tightness in the hips. He's a little bit of a polarizing prospect. Some think the traits have pushed him farther up the board than he deserves to be based on the tape. And then others believe that the combination of what they see on tape so far and the traits make it pretty easy to project him as a guy with a ton of upside. So he was my number 1 safety for Seahawk Fits at 34 or 35. Love it. Love the pick, and I talked about that last night. Quarterback, of course, Jalen Milroe was my number 2 Seahawk fit. I even talked in that episode a couple of weeks ago, and it's worth a watch if you haven't seen it yet, about how even if they used 18 on him, I would have felt a lot more uncomfortable with that pick just because of opportunity cost, potentially. But all the reasons that would have made sense make even more sense at 90 or at 92. At 92, it's an absolute no-brainer. At tight end, I had Elijah Arroyo. Got it. Nailed it that time. As my third favorite tight end. You know, Colston Loveland ended up not even being in the picture. He was drafted number 10 overall by the Bears. Thought he might slip to 18 because of the labrum surgery. Mason Taylor was a guy that we knew that they liked. They brought in for a 30 visit, but he was drafted a little bit ahead of that. But Arroyo, of all the guys they talked about last night, like the excitement was centered around Milroe. But when John Schneider talked about Arroyo, he really perked up. He got excited, and it sounds like they have extremely high regard and conviction for that player. Running back. Look who's number 1 on my list, Damian Martinez. Didn't know exactly where he'd go, but I thought he was going to fall into a range because of the depth of the class where it would make sense. I was thinking 5th round, maybe with those 2 comp picks they had at the back of the 5th round. To get him in the 7th is a slam dunk. And then interior offensive line, obviously Gray Zabel was my number 1 guy there. So, my mock draft stunk, but not too shabby in my positional rankings, if I must say so myself. So let's talk about these guys. First, Riley Mills at the 4th pick in the 5th round. 6'5", 291 pounds. 62 games played. He's one of those guys that played for 5 years. He stayed all 5 years at Notre Dame. He's almost 24 years old. I know some people might have an issue with that, kind of the overage thing, which we're still kind of getting some remnants of and leftovers from the COVID impact. But it means he's played a lot of big time football games in a big time. Well, they're not in a conference, but they always line up, some of the biggest opponents, and they play in some of the biggest games, and he's played in big bowl games and obviously the college football playoff, although he got injured in that first week. And that's why he was available in the 5th round at the 4th pick like that, because of the ACL. 62 games played over the last 5 years. They list him as a defensive end, 5, and even Mike McDonald said a 6 technique. At that size, one of the quickest get-offs at that position in the draft. He's extremely physical, and his motor never stops. He runs hot. You never have to worry about effort with him. He's extremely productive. 17 sacks, 22 tackles for loss in his career. He was a late riser. Let me show you this tweet that, and now I don't have it. I think it was Jeremy Fowler, actually, that said on Tuesday that one of the guys that's not being talked about enough in the media and among fans and analysts, but the coaches and scouts love him, and he could sneak into the top 100, was Riley Mills. He was a guy that was seen as kind of flying under the radar. And the best example of that, he was an official 30 visit to the Seahawks, and it was never reported. I think about 20 of those names came out, and teams aren't required to bring in all 30, and some often don't. But the Seahawks try as hard as they can to keep things close to the vest and sort of under the table. But usually it's the agents that leak those things out, or the players themselves. Sometimes they'll post something on social media. Mills came into the VMAC and nobody reported it. They did report Ty Robinson, kind of a similar player, a little bit of a similar profile out of Nebraska. Thought he might be a target. Talked about him a lot on Twitter today as we kind of worked through the draft. But Robinson went earlier. He was a VMAC visitor also, but Mills was a guy that kind of kept quiet and sounds like one of the most enthusiastic guys to be a Seahawk. He said today, his draft call, you could hear the enthusiasm, like, let's go, let's get to work, I can't wait. He said, I knew it was going to be you guys. That's what I wanted. John Schneider made a joke in his press conference tonight about how, kind of sarcastically, he said, yeah, you couldn't tell how excited he was to be a Seahawk in the meeting. So on top of just the upside in the projection, like, guy wanted to be here. 14.3% pass rush win rate. That's fourth in college football last year, in this class anyway, among interior defensive line players. And Schneider said today also, if we hadn't drafted him, I'm not sure AD, Adam Dirty, the defensive line coach and defensive coordinator for the Seahawks, would have shown up to work on Monday. So he was pounding the table for this guy. So he suffered the ACL injury in the first game of the college football playoffs. It was friendly fire. He was flying to make a play in the backfield and ran into one of his own teammates, and it just kind of whipped that leg the wrong way. He said today he feels great and he is ahead of schedule in the ACL. And as much as we've seen ACL injuries kind of go from where, it used to be an 18-month recovery, and then for years it was kind of 12 months was sort of the understood standard. We're seeing guys come back in 6 to 8 months now. Connor Williams was ready by week 1 after suffering an ACL injury late in the year from Miami. We saw Jordan Brooks have ACL surgery in January a couple of years ago and start the first game for the Seahawks in early September without a brace. But John Schneider gave a more tempered and conservative outlook in the press conference, and maybe this was to just temper expectations. But he said they're really hoping that they feel good about the knee, obviously, or they wouldn't have taken him. But they hope to have him back by mid-season or the second half of the season. I think there's a chance that he comes back a little bit earlier than that, but looks like a candidate to probably start the season on the PUP list, which is why we need to talk about defensive line moving forward over the next week or so, because the one defensive lineman you took in this draft that you feel really good about, that I love the pick, I love this kid's upside, not going to be ready till halfway through the season. So they got some work to do there. And then in the fifth round, pick number 30, Torrey Horton, wide receiver, Colorado State, 6'2.5", 196 pounds. Ran a 4.41 at the combine. But before the combine, as he was prepping for the combine, reportedly ran a 4.35. Huge production in 2022 and 2023. 265 catches for 3,500 yards, 27 touchdowns, and averaged 13.6 yards per catch in his career. Also returned some punts, can give him that sort of value, 16 yards per punt return. He was 103 on the consensus big board, and the Seahawks get him at 166. Tremendous value there. There were a couple of receivers that fell that were expected to go earlier. And what was interesting about this pick is the Seahawks were sitting there earlier in the fifth round. And there were two guys I was talking about on Twitter that I thought fit really well. Torrey Horton was one of them. Alec Iomanner from Stanford was the other. I had Alec Iomanner as a second or third round draft pick in a lot of mocks I did. Thought he was a really clean fit for the Seahawks as an X-receiver. Really good size-speed combination. Really huge catch radius, long arms, and the best blocker in the class. And that is especially important to the Seahawks and Clint Kubiak in that scheme. One of the reasons that Cooper Kupp was so appealing to them. So the Seahawks were sitting there, and I was thinking Iomanner would have been my preferred pick, and the Tennessee Titans moved up and traded into the pick right before them, obviously reading the tea leaves. Seahawks needed to draft a boundary receiver, an X-receiver. Marquez Valdez-Scantling is 31 years old on a one-year deal. They read the room. They moved up and sniped him a pick before Seattle. About 5 seconds after that trade was reported, the Seahawks bailed out of that pick and traded down. So I do think Iomanner was probably graded slightly higher on their board than Torrey Horton because of the blocking ability, mostly. The reason Horton was still available in the 5th round with that production is he did suffer a knee injury last year, missed the second half of the season. I heard Daniel Jeremiah on his podcast a couple of weeks ago, or on the Athletic podcast with Robert Mays, talking about how he just doesn't understand why Torrey Horton wasn't getting more buzz. Maybe it was prospect fatigue because he's been so productive for so long. Maybe it was the injury issue. But I think that's great value at the end of the 5th round to get a guy that I think walks into the locker room and day one is at least wide receiver 4 in that room, with Valdez-Scantling just slightly ahead of him because of the veteran presence and how well he played for Kubiak last year and some of the production he's had. You can make an argument for wide receiver 3. I think he jumps ahead of Philip Bobo, certainly. And we still don't know 4 years in what Derek Young is or what he might be able to offer. So really, really like that pick. Robbie Oates, as I said before, 6'3", 274, not exactly the traditional fullback size, but then you look at like what Patrick Richard is doing at 280, 285 pounds in Baltimore. And he just models that game. Like, he only had 16 catches in his entire career at Alabama. Tested better. I remember seeing this kid at the combine, and he stood out for a couple reasons. One is I thought, well, I'm familiar with C.J. Dupree, the other tight end from Alabama, who was also drafted, who I saw at the Senior Bowl. He was a guy that, didn't get as many targets maybe as he would like at Alabama, but I thought had some really cool upside. I thought, why are they taking this kid? In fact, they took him before Dupree was drafted. But then shortly after that, it was announced that the Seahawks have listed him as a fullback, and so that's the plan for him. Really athletic for that size, though, at 6'3", 274, 4.9 40, 34-inch vertical jump. Very, very strong. And maybe my favorite line I've seen in any scouting reports this offseason, this from Lance Zierlein on the NFL Network, built like an iron worker who has a squat rack in his garage. He just kind of has that look. And very similar to Gray Zabel, as a matter of fact. He's going to be challenging Gray Zabel for best mustache on the team. Kind of a similar look. But Zierlein also said in his profile, a move to fullback will give him a chance to compete for a roster spot. So I thought that was really, really cool, a cool spot. Something that they said they would be looking for in the draft. They brought in Adam Prentice, who played fullback last year in New Orleans for Clint Kubiak. Haven't signed him yet. They announced earlier in the week that Brady Russell was going to be converted full-time to fullback, another tight end fullback convert, kind of similar body style, 6'4", 260. Mike McDonald had a really cool quote when talking about this in the competition. He said we really like Robbie, but betting against Brady Russell is not something I would do. So cool competition there. And I think Russell provides a little bit more upside than Oates does as a guy that can also play tight end, kind of can be that hybrid role, or if you have any injury issues or anything like that, he can still line up out there and do that. And then at 6, in the 6th round, and why did the Seahawks have a 6th round pick? A lot of moving and shaking in this draft. They trade up to get Riley Mills. They trade back a couple of times, and then they trade Sam Howell to the Minnesota Vikings. Shout out to Jeff Simmons, who about 20 seconds after the Drew Lock signing was announced, said that the Vikings make the most sense. Schneider had been really transparent in the last few days about how they like Sam, and they talked about him competing with Drew, but yeah, they're talking to some teams, and there's some interest in him, and sounds like he confirmed today they've been talking to the Vikings ever since the owners' meetings a couple of weeks ago, but there were other teams involved as well. Just a really clear fit. And then the Vikings today saying that they really liked Howell in the draft. They just didn't have an opportunity to draft him that year. So Howell gets traded for a pick swap and a later pick. So they pick up another 7th rounder. But that's what allowed them to move up in the 5th round. And they selected Bryce Cabaldo in the 6th round. They did not have a 6th round pick before this. 6'4", 306 pounds, played tackle at Kansas, played mostly tackle. In fact, played left tackle last year instead of Logan Brown, who was kicked to the right side. And Logan Brown was the guy that was ranked higher throughout most of the process and went to the Senior Bowl. Cabaldo went to the Shrine Game. But a really intriguing player because we're talking about elite athleticism here. Like one of the most athletic offensive linemen in this class. There are some reports out there that he has a tremendous amount of work to do as a pass protector. But sometimes guys that struggle in pass protection on the edge, you move them inside a little bit. They have a little support on each side. They play in a phone booth a little bit. It helps them out there. But certainly the play mentality, like he's another one of those guys. Like in this range, Chase Lunt out of UConn, who's a guy I've talked about a lot on the show. He was my preference there, but they liked Cabell-Dew more. Had him in for a 30 visit. There were quite a few reports leading up to the draft that they really, really like this guy. And so they take him. And a guy that's going to be in that guard competition. For those of you who were worried that they were just going to take Gray Zabel in the first round and say, see, we committed to an offensive lineman in the first round finally. We got a guy that's plug and play. He's going to play left guard for us. There you go. And then Christian Haynes and Satawa LeMay are going to battle it out at right guard. We really like those guys. And Anthony Bradford might figure in there as well. Well, now Cabell-Dew, I think, is a guy that's going to be in that competition as well. And maybe a guy, because he has played left and right tackle, might be more comfortable playing left and right guard. Could be a guy that works at both sides. But they also did that last year with Haynes and Laumea. So a lot of versatility there. They can mix and match a little bit, try to find the best spots for these guys. Then we get into the 7th round where we had 3 picks, and they were kind of sprinkled evenly throughout the round. The 7th pick in the 7th round, this is where Damian Martinez was taken. And I was sitting in a Starbucks watching this thing and just got incredibly excited at the pick. Obviously, you saw my positional rankings. He was number 1 on my board. 6 foot, 217 pounds. He played in the 230 range at Oregon State. Was really instrumental at Oregon State in helping to elevate that program. He was a problem for the rest of what used to be the Pac-12. And then he transfers to Miami, ends up getting down to 217. I think he weighed in a little bit more than that. I think he was in the 220-ish range at the Senior Bowl. What really impressed me at the Senior Bowl and on tape is he plays like a big back, over 3,000 yards in his career, 6.2 yards per carry, 26 touchdowns, 4.5 yards after contact. That was 8th in all of college football last year. That stat, courtesy of Rob Staten. Shout out to Rob. 6 foot 220-ish, still runs a 4.5 40 and plays. He's deceptive. From a physical standpoint, he might be the second most physical runner. Well, third most. Can't put that past Ashton Genty up at the top. But almost Cam Scadaboo-like. Like you find reps where he is stopped 3 yards in, and you're waiting for the ref to blow the whistle, and he's pushing the pile, and then he breaks away. He refers to himself as Beast Mode 2.0, but he has incredibly quick feet. He's very patient. I saw some really cool jump cuts from him in Mobile. Once he picks his lane, he goes, and then he's hard to bring down. He's a decisive runner, and I think immediately, if you're concerned about like what it might mean for the running back room, where he might fit in, I know the team liked George Halani as an undrafted free agent last year. I think Damian Martinez immediately leapfrogs him on the roster, and Halani's going to have a hard time making this squad. But also with all the depth in this class and elsewhere around the league, probably a guy that you can pretty safely get to the practice squad on the cut down to 53. And then at the 18th pick of the 7th round, the Seahawks go back to the offensive line again. If you thought they were done, guess what? They're not. 3 more offensive linemen. The Seahawks have now officially drafted more offensive linemen in the last 2 years than any team in football. Mason Richman. And this is a guy I had to do some work on. Hadn't heard of him, didn't study him, went to the NFL.com combine tracker like I always do with the Lance Zierlein and all the work he does over there, and had a blank profile, had no information, no picture. And all that was on his page, it said probably has to go to a developmental league in order to get ready for the league. But I think his profile is different than that. I was surprised when I did a little bit of work on him. A 5-year starter at Iowa at left tackle. The only other player in Iowa history that's done that is Tristan Wirfs, and he turned out okay. 6'6", 312 pounds. Played 55 games across those 5 seasons. Very, very good zone fit. He is a good mover. Was certainly athletic enough to play left tackle at Iowa for 5 years. And as much as we know they like to be physical and run the ball, that's part of his game as well. It was immediately announced and assumed that he would also be moved to guard and join the competition there. But Mike Macdonald confirmed in the press conference after the draft tonight, he's going to get a shot at tackle first. And that checks a box that I was really hoping to check coming into this draft, especially on day 3. I wanted a guy, ideally that could play both sides, a young swing tackle. Josh Jones was signed, and he's just 27 years old, but it's just a 1-year deal. And so I wanted a guy that could kind of be, as I've said before, like what we hoped Stone Forsythe would be, like a young tackle with starter upside on one side or the other, but that could be comfortable playing both sides. I think that's a really important roster spot to carry. I think Mason Richmond has an opportunity to jump ahead of Mike Jarrell. I don't think Mike Jarrell can play on the left side. I think he's right side only, and that jump from Division II to the NFL, even though he's got some cool athletic traits, he's going to be in an uphill battle to make the roster, I think. So Richmond's cool in that regard and a really good zone fit. But I wanted somebody on the roster that in the event that they move off of Abe Lucas, don't resign him after the series on the last year of his rookie deal, that he might have a shot at doing that. And they really like Richmond. In particular, Schneider gave John Benton a lot of credit on this pick, that he was a guy that he really campaigned for and was excited to get in and work with, and was kind of behind the decision to like, hey, let's give him a shot at tackle first. So that positional versatility seems to be something now that the Seahawks value in their offensive linemen. And that's something that certainly the Philadelphia Eagles have had such success with over the years. It was also kind of cool. One of the fun moments today from the draft room, Seahawks had flown Gray Zabel into Seattle, so he was at the VMAC today, and they had him call Mason Richmond to tell him he was being drafted, one Midwest offensive tackle or offensive lineman to another. And at first, Richmond, you could tell from the call, and Greg Bell reported this as well, that he thought it was a prank call. But then he figured out it was a real deal, and Richmond said, yeah, us Midwest guys have to stick together. And then they wrap up the draft, 11 players in total, tying John Schneider's biggest draft class. Ricky White, the third wide receiver, UNLV. This was a name that many of you, as we were looking at wide receiver candidates that might make sense at some point in the draft, you guys brought this name up to me a lot. 6'1", 184 pounds. Ran a 4.6 40 at the combine, and maybe that's why he was available at the 22nd pick in the 7th round. But according to Greg Bell, really went to work after that, and at his pro day clocked a 4.4, which is much better and looks much more like what he can do on tape. He looks much shiftier and more dynamic on tape than you would think from a 4.6 40 guy. Incredibly productive at UNLV, 228 catches, 3,300 yards, 24 touchdowns, averages almost 15 yards per catch. So I think he's got great upside as a receiver. And when you look at that room kind of moving forward, as I mentioned, like we don't know what Derek Young is going to be. I think he presents more as a receiver prospect than sometimes you see in the 7th round, because a lot of times 7th round receivers are drafted in many cases for their special teams acumen. I think White's a guy that at some point in his rookie contract could become a contributor in the passing game. But guess what? He's also an elite special teams player. He was named the special teams player of the year in the Mountain West last year. Schneider said he blocked 4 punts in his career, and that he reminded him of Donald Driver, who obviously, had the great career in Green Bay. Schneider wasn't in Green Bay at the time they drafted him, but he got some exposure to him while he was there. And he was a 6th round pick who was a special teams specialist his first couple of years in the league. That's what got him on the roster and made him his money. And then he became the Packers' #1 receiver for many years. So I thought that was a really cool, interesting comp. A couple of trends in this class. Again, the Seahawks, and they seem to have made this shift in about 2020. They favor and prefer players from Power 4 schools, or what used to be Power 5 schools. Rest in peace, Pac-12. Similar theme again this year. 9 of the 11 players from Power 4 schools. The only other 2, the 2 wide receivers out of the Mountain West, Colorado State and UNLV. The other one, and the big one, is athleticism. They were chasing traits in this draft. They were chasing upside. Here is a tweet with some information from Next Gen Stats from ESPN earlier today. The Seahawks targeted elite athletes throughout the draft, selecting a league-high 4 players with a Next Gen Stats athleticism score of 85 or higher. Seattle's first 4 picks had an average athleticism score of 91, the highest by any team in the draft since 2003. So, this happens every year. We've talked about this draft now for 3 months. You guys, as fans and viewers, are more sophisticated than ever. You have more information at your disposal than you've ever had before. All 22 tape, scouting analysis, YouTube videos, mock draft simulators, big boards galore. The offseason has become an incredible event, and many of you have become as addicted to it as I've been for 40 years. And so along with that comes philosophies and opinions. And a lot of you get hung up on value and what you perceive based on big boards or what you think a player is. And if a guy gets taken 20 picks ahead of where you think he's ranked, he's a reach and you don't know what they're doing. Or you think they take a player that isn't necessary today, you think it's a wasted pick. I had somebody tell me just before I went live that Jalen Milroe taking a backup quarterback in the 3rd round is a wasted pick. To which my answer is almost always, that's not how the draft works. You take the best players you can take at the spot you're in, that you have conviction about, that you believe in, that you see a role for, that you see upside for, whether they hit the ground running and become a contributor day one, or it takes a couple of years. Most take a couple of years. You get to the 3rd round, there's not a lot of slam dunk immediate starters there. But also, the last 3rd round quarterback he took turned out pretty well. And he was taken as a backup. Nobody thought, even the team didn't think he was going to start as a rookie. They signed Matt Flynn and gave him big money at the time. And they also had Tavares Jackson still, who had started a bunch of games in the league. And so, we talked about this a couple of days on the show. Like, I've removed the word reach from my scouting vocabulary and have for the last couple of years. I defer to the team. They know more than I do. I know a lot. I study a lot. And I think I know a lot about football. I can't fit in my pinky thumbnail the amount of knowledge that that the Seahawks have, or any front office in the NFL. These guys are incredibly committed and incredibly smart and work incredibly hard at what they do. So I am someone that believes in upside, high ceiling, athletic traits. I think the Seahawks, when they drafted so poorly from 2014 to about 2019, got caught thinking more about floor than ceiling. They drafted safely. They were afraid to make mistakes. They wanted to take guys. They didn't have a lot of starting spots open during many of those years, so they took guys that they thought could still make the team as backups. It was backwards thinking. They shifted that philosophy in 2020, and when you look back at the last 4 drafts now, you see it. And so always give me traits. Always give me athletic upside. But also you combine that with character and passion for football and work ethic and commitment, which is something the Seahawks value. They don't take guys that they think have a questionable commitment to the game. And I absolutely love everything about this draft. You can't look at a draft class of 11 players and go, well, they all have to become starters or else they were failed picks. It's just not how it works. You take shots on guys. When I look at the big picture, when I zoom out, what I like the most about this class, when you combine it to the rest of the roster and much of the foundation from the last 3 classes. Also, by the way, Ernest Jones was a 4th round pick in this class as well. Still just 25, or I think he just turned 26 years old. So you have to count that. That's part of this value. It's really a 12-man draft class, right? I think when you start to look ahead to next year now, with what's on the roster, you've taken care now of quarterback in a pretty significant way. You went out and signed a 27-year-old quarterback coming off a year where he had MVP votes and who they believe is a number 1, a franchise-type quarterback I think the Seahawks really do believe, I've been steadfast in this for a long time, and Mike McDonald today even said Sam Darnold is killing it in the offseason program so far. They love him. He wasn't just a stopgap. He wasn't a Band-Aid because Geno wanted out. They were working on Sam Darnold before Geno asked for a trade. And so that's option number one. But they take a shot on a guy in the third round that if he realizes his full potential, you have a potential superstar there. If he doesn't, his floor is as an elite gadget player. And they talked more today, but he's going to have a role as a rookie. They're going to allot a number of practice reps to him to help him develop. Sounds like about 10% of the reps. I wish somebody had asked if they use the VR stuff yet, the virtual reality stuff that Jane Daniels credits for a lot of his development at LSU, because that would make a lot of sense with Milroe just needing to take a step forward in processing and making reads. So that box is checked. You're unlikely with a quarterback room of Sam Darnold, Drew Lock, and Jalen Milroe, who, if you don't believe in Jalen Milroe, first of all, go back and watch that episode I did 2 weeks ago. You can see in the comments that I changed some people's minds. Like I laid out the case, and all those points still apply to what happened yesterday in the third round. In fact, they apply even stronger because it's better value. You're not hunting quarterback next year in the draft. You aren't hunting offensive line next year in the draft. Maybe you're looking at a right tackle, depending on what happens with Abe Lucas, right? But those guys are usually pretty plentiful, and you can get them at the mid to back half of the first round. And you might be hunting defensive line, but those guys are usually pretty plentiful, and you can find them all throughout the first and second round. You start to look ahead to that. It's like, okay, this year they were fortunate because the most glaring need on the roster, they needed to get a stud starter at left guard coming into this draft. Schneider has confirmed that in his conversations the last couple of days, that after they took the shot on Will Fries and missed on it because they felt like he was a guy that was worth $51 million, they didn't throw silly money at other guys they didn't think were as good because they knew at that point, they were confident enough in the draft work they had done up until that point and what they saw at the Senior Bowl, that they knew they were going to have a shot to get a guy that could be that starter at left guard in the draft. And pretty specifically, they were targeting Gray Zabel even back then. So that's where, when we all looked at the history, they're not just not going to do it. The value's not there. He's never done it. Even when he's telling us they had a plan, even when he's telling us it's a need, he acknowledges it, they're going to fix it. None of us believed really he was going to go guard in the first round. They had to this year. Well, next year's draft, I don't think there's going to be that glaring weakness. Maybe it's right tackle, but again, okay, because you're going to find that guy. Maybe they need another defensive tackle or an edge. Okay. So I think they line up well. And so when some of you say to me like, oh, look at the Eagles and the Ravens and the Steelers every year, although they only had 4 picks this year, so they weren't their usual selves. But the Ravens and the Eagles often get credit for they just sit there and let the draft come to them, and they end up with all these great players that other teams pass on, and they get this great value. Well, it's because their rosters are at a point where they just don't ever have that glaring, obvious need, and that allows you to just take what comes to you. I think there's a good chance that next offseason that's where we're at with Seahawks, and that they'll get to that point. They'll get to where you're working from ahead instead of behind. 4 years ago, it was the defensive line. They just couldn't catch up. So they had to keep making 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago. They had to keep making these moves and trade second-round picks and go get Jadeveon Clowney and Sheldon Richardson and then get Carlos Dunlap. But they couldn't get ahead of it. Then they finally did. Well, now, a little bit of a concern, and there's some work still to be done there. We'll be talking about that over the next couple of weeks, as I said. San Francisco 49ers, a good example of the flip side of that, where that defensive line was so dominant 3-4 years ago, but they moved on from those guys. They moved on from Eric Armstead. They move on, right? And now they have Nick Bosa and nothing else. So they went into this draft and they just went, look at their draft. It's just almost all defensive line. They committed almost their entire draft to their front 4, front 5, front 7 because they had to. Well, they have other needs too. They have offensive line needs. They have linebacker. They have some skill position needs. It takes a while to catch up when you're working from behind. I think the Seahawks are going to have a good chance next offseason to work from ahead because of the quality of the last few drafts, plus this one. So I think it was the perfect time to shoot for upside. Stop being safe. And then when you talk about Mike Macdonald, John Schneider, and the alignment that they discussed, you can hear the same page they're on. And the influence that Mike Macdonald had on, hey, this is the identity I want us to have. And John Schneider listening to that and wanting to draft players for that. Not like Tim Ruskell did, right? Brandon Kane brought that up when we talked a week and a half ago. Like Tim Ruskell, when the reason that didn't work with Mike Holmgren is he just drafted the players he liked and he gave them to Mike Holmgren and he said, just deal with it. And they weren't a fit. They weren't guys that Holmgren wanted or that fit his ideal for his schemes and the way he wanted to play. And John Benton and the influence he had. You know, Richmond's a good example there. Hey, I like this kid. You know, let's take him here. But also, not so fast I'm moving him to guard. Let's give him a shot at tackle first. Really, really cool stuff. Let's go over the undrafted free agent class really quick, and then we'll do some comments and questions. I'm just going to go to the field goals tracker. The interesting thing about this class is there's a lot of names. There were a lot of names, and I had a list prepared of about 30 names that I was going to talk about tonight. And they were all guys we've talked about on the show that I had mock draft to the Seahawks that I thought gave tremendous value, that names you would recognize at positions that they need or didn't address and that fell through the cracks. And I thought they had a chance to go get some of those guys. They signed a bunch of dudes that I'm not familiar with. And so sometime in the next week or two, I'll lean on someone. I'll probably have Corbin on after things settle down for him. And we'll get someone on that can kind of talk with some expertise. We'll bring Justin Mello back from the Draft Network as well to talk more specifically about these guys. But just to go over it, they addressed some needs in undrafted free agency that they didn't get to address in the draft. Specifically cornerback. John was asked about that in the presser tonight. He said it just didn't fall our way. There's some guys we liked, but we just didn't get a chance to get them. And then he was asked, like, is there work to be done there? And he said, yes. And so the corners, Zy Alexander out of LSU is a guy that I'm surprised didn't get drafted. Tall, long corner, obviously played in the SEC, really cool cover skills. I think he has a good shot to make the roster. He was the first reported signing, so I think he was a priority for them. And then Cam Stone from Hawaii was invited to the Seahawks rookie minicamp. Not signed, but invited to their minicamp. They had 12 spots available on their roster, according to Mookie Alexander. The 12 reported undrafted free agent signings. Schneider and McDonald in their press conference talked in terms of, we've signed the class. It's done. Interestingly enough, the Seahawks typically have been one of the last teams to officially announce their undrafted free agent class. Usually doesn't happen until Tuesday, Wednesday. Last year, I think it happened even later in the week than that. A couple of times, though, that has been due to they've had a tight salary cap. They've had to adjust some contracts before they could sign the class. Not the case this year with $36 million in cap space. And so maybe, if they haven't already, maybe they will officially announce it. Some teams already have. Undrafted free agency used to take a couple of days, but it's so competitive. It's more competitive now than ever, which is why their press conference took a little while. Because they were on the phone. They were recruiting. Some of the other guys, Illinois defensive end linebacker Seth Coleman, Illinois State outside linebacker Jalen Gaines, Florida Atlantic center Federico Menages, South Alabama defensive lineman Wykevius Bubba Thompson. Kind of sounds like a Key and Peele name almost. Northwestern tight end Marshall Lang, Utah edge Connor O'Toole, who's got a really interesting athletic profile. Really athletic dude. West Virginia defensive tackle TJ Jackson. Villanova defensive back Isas Waxter, who had draftable grades. Another taller corner from Villanova. Zy Alexander, who I mentioned. Central Florida offensive lineman Amari Knight. And Arkansas wide receiver Tyrone Broden from Arkansas. Not a very productive player. Had a 20% drop rate. And if you wonder, well, why is he worth signing? Because he's 6'7" and runs a sub 4.3 40. Let's bring that kid to camp and just see what he can do with those traits, right? And then another guy that I'm really excited about that they're inviting to rookie mini camp, and I hope they sign him, is Louisville defensive tackle Thor Griffith, 6'2", 320 pounds, one of the strongest players in the draft. I tweeted a video of him bench pressing 500 pounds, also runs a 4.9 40. Like, his tape is really cool. He can play that nose tackle position, but he's got some penetration upside as well. He's really the only guy that's been added in the draft or undrafted free agency that kind of projects as a nose tackle. That's kind of a miss in this draft. And Mike McDonald was asked, like, is there more work to do on the defensive line? He said, yeah, there is. So I think that's something they'll be active in. Sometimes you get some late undrafted guys. Once we get to June or maybe even earlier in some cases, because once teams get their draft class in and they realize, they take a look at what their roster is, they take stock of that. Sometimes you get some releases at that point, or some players may become available in trade. There's really nothing on the free agent market at the nose tackle position at this point, other than some older guys like Jonathan Hankins was last year. And so I think as we sit here today, especially, with the news earlier this week that Cam Young, the 4th-round draft pick from 2 years ago, was released, I think, there's going to be some pressure on Mike Morris to take another step forward. He didn't really contribute last year. We were expecting more out of him. I think that's going to be something we'll be watching. They'll find a way to add to that position. Certainly. It's a bummer that Riley Mills won't be ready to go at the start of the season. I'd feel a lot better about that group if he was. It's just so thin right now. If Jaron Reed or Byron Murphy or Leo Williams gets nicked up, they're in some trouble there. So I think there's more work there to be done. Certainly, we'll have to see kind of how that works out. And then at cornerback is the other one. Schneider acknowledged work to be done. Like Zy Alexander, that's a cool pick. But also, I would fully expect that Shaq Griffin, the former Seahawks 3rd-round draft pick, he's still just 27, 28 years old. I was surprised to see that the other day. Things didn't work out for him as well in Jacksonville after he moved on after his rookie contract, made some money there. But he kind of bounced back last year in Minnesota as a rotational corner there, played really well. And we know about the speed, some of the physicality. The knock on him, he was a guy that was in position a lot because of the speed and the coverage ability, but he just didn't have great ball skills, didn't get a lot of production on the ball. But I think he would make a ton of sense as probably a close to veteran minimum type player. They had him in for a visit a couple weeks ago. I would fully expect now, the way the draft went, that we'll see news sometime in the next week or so that Shaq Griffin signed with the Seahawks. Let's get into this, you guys. Juan Adame, am I pronouncing that right? Thanks for the super chat. Great draft, great show, Dan. Go Hawks. I appreciate that. Thank you. Brent Robinette also with the super chat. Did anyone else notice all the mustaches? Yeah, right. That was a theme too. So we had big schools, athleticism, and mustaches. And it's funny then, Gray Zabel and then Oates. Maybe that'll become a trend. Maybe we'll see some other guys show up to training camp with some of those stashes. Thanks for that, you guys. This is an interesting one. Kevin Dilly. This is a name I hadn't thought of. Thank you for reminding me. You think the Cowboys trade Mazi Smith? They desperately need a wide receiver. We have like 6 or 7 on the roster. I don't think any of those guys are expendable, though. But for a 2026 pick, man, if there's any way, if they think that Dallas had another really good draft again this year. Mazi Smith was a guy they took in the first round 2 years ago. He was a guy we all kind of targeted and thought might be a Seahawk possibility. Sort of Kenneth Grant before he was Kenneth Grant, like 330 pounds, but was on Bruce Feldman's freak list. Big dude. He just hasn't lived up to expectations there. We know Adam Dirty coached him in Dallas. I mean, if there's any chance that he's available, I would certainly look into that. Yeah, I don't know what he would cost you as a first-round pick 2 years ago, but I'd look into it. I'd make a call. I like that idea. I do like that idea. Some suggestion here of maybe Jalen Ramsey. I just don't think he's fit. I think he's still got something left in the tank. He played pretty well last year. PFF was pretty kind to him. But just a couple of years ago, this is a guy that they were talking about moving to safety because they thought he had lost a little bit. Not Not a big fan of that move. Here we go. Mike Smith says, good draft. Go Hawks. I think overwhelmingly from what I have seen on social media and the interaction that I get with y'all, I think most of you are feeling really good about this draft. And one thing that surprised me a little bit is the Jalen Milroe pick. I think overwhelmingly fans seem to be excited about. And I think it's because it happened at 92. If it had happened in the first or second round, I think we might have a little bit more of a burn down the house mentality. Although I did have someone tell me that's the pick that's going to get John Schneider fired, which, again, I find ridiculous. Let me see here. Samurai says they say Zai will be a better fit in his own scheme. Well, that's I got good news for you. Mike McDonald plays mostly zone. Someone suggests trading Noah Fant for Jalen Ramsey. I don't see that. They want to keep Noah Fant. They need 3 or 4 tight ends on the roster because Clint Kubiak will play 12 and 13 personnel as much as any coordinator in the league. So Noah Fant's not going anywhere. Not this year anyway. Yep, John says would like to see Griffin back in Seattle. I just think it makes too much sense not to happen. I think, they had a great relationship with him. He's such a good locker room dude. And I think he can contribute. He can play. I also, again, I'll say it again. I think if Nick Emenwari takes to this box role, this big nickel and dime role that McDonald envisions for him as a rookie while they continue to, he says, quote unquote, train him at safety, that's going to free up Devin Witherspoon to play more on the boundary. So now you're talking about Reek Woolen, who I don't think was in any jeopardy of getting traded once we got past, day 2. But certainly the fact the Seahawks didn't draft a corner, I think that squashed any possibility that was going to happen. Reek Woolen, Devin Witherspoon on the outside, Josh Jobe rotating in. You still have Pritchett, who they drafted in the 5th round last year. Like, they have to still like him. You add Zai Alexander to that mix and Shaq Griffin. I think that's a pretty solid group that you can be okay with. Let's see what else we got from you guys. Yeah, you guys are smart, man. You guys are throwing some names out and really familiar with some of the undrafted free agents. Okay, Vince says, tell me about Zay Alexander. How good are we talking? Let me go back to, let me pull up Lance Zierlein's scouting report because there were some really cool things on there that he had to say. Hold on. About Zay. Gives him a grade of 6.15, which is a good backup with the potential to develop into a starter. That's usually a grade that gets you drafted. 6'1", 187 pounds, 31-inch arms, 9.25-inch hands, a 4.56 second 40-yard dash. That's not great, but the 1.53 10-yard split's okay. 31.5-inch vertical jump. Started his career at Southwestern Louisiana for 3 years and then transferred to LSU in 23 and 24. At LSU, started 19 games, 77 tackles, 11 pass breakups, 4 interceptions, 2.5 tackles for loss, and a sack. Alexander utilizes size, speed, length, and athleticism through all phases of coverage. He's not overly disruptive from press, which is okay. The Seahawks don't play a ton of press, but rarely allows much separation if beaten. He leverages routes with pattern recognition and maintains connection to the route from trail. He's effective for man and zone with timing and tracking that can make him a coveted prospect for defenses with heavy cover 3 looks. Alexander's tools and traits give him a chance to become a starter. That is a terrific profile for a player who just went undrafted. He did suffer an ACL tear in 2023, but he was healthy in 2024. His weaknesses: below average slide to match and cut off press release, sticks with face guarding instead of turning to find the football. That's a huge pet peeve of mine, but let's leave it to Mike McDonald and Carl Scott to help coach him up in that respect. Can lose coverage concentration when the quarterback scrambles. That sounds like a teachable opportunity. Needs more aggression with dealing with blocking receivers, and then in the ACL tear. So that's a pretty cool profile, as I said, for a guy who was undrafted, which might explain why he was the first guy that was reported, because maybe he was a priority for the Seahawks to get in there. Let's see. Seahawks fan asks, hey, Dan, what was your least favorite pick and your favorite? For me, my favorite pick was Martinez. He was a big steal. Yeah, I agree. And the least was Arroyo. Is it just because of the injury history? Because I'm telling you, and I saw this kid, I saw him in Mobile, and he is so impressive. This sounds like a guy, like Schneider said yesterday, like his coaches told him, he said he could play X receiver. He can run the full route tree. He's explosive. He gains separation. This is a guy that I think has all pro upside. I really do. And so, yeah, that's not my least favorite pick at all. I guess if I was, I'm trying to remember now kind of who I was looking at the time. I think the Richmond pick, I would say, just because even though it's, mid 7th round, there were still, I wanted another interior offensive lineman. I wanted a tackle, so it checked that box. But I wanted a guy that could play center and guard. And there's some guys I really like. Luke Kandra out of Cincinnati didn't get drafted. That blows me away. He's a perfect zone, wide zone player with a really physical mentality. Clay Webb was a guy from the Senior Bowl that I really liked. There were some other guys. I had heard that they really like Seth McLaughlin, the center from Ohio State. He's coming off an Achilles tear. They've got depth at center. I don't think he would have even challenged there for the starting job as a rookie anyway, but maybe an opportunity to draft him and just kind of redshirt him, right? Keep him on the injured reserve the whole year. I would probably say that one just because there were some other guys that I liked a little bit more in that range. And then my favorite pick of the entire draft, I got to tell you guys, like, as much as I like the draft as a whole, just my organic, genuine reaction in the moment when they drafted Jalen Milroe, just the idea to get a guy with that kind of upside, that could potentially, like, if you're going to take a shot on a quarterback, take a shot on a quarterback with elite traits and upside. As much as I have been connected to and studied Quinn Ewers over the last couple of years because of the connections to Schneider, so there were times where I've talked myself into Quinn Ewers. I talked myself out of him before the draft, but I was still a little bit afraid that Seattle would draft him at some point because of all the connections with Schneider over the years, not the least of which is the fact that he's been training with Mike McCarthy this offseason, and he and Schneider have a long history together and are very close. But Ewers just doesn't have elite upside. Like, his ceiling is as a capable starter that you're probably, even if he plays pretty well, you're probably always kind of have an eye on the future and looking to upgrade that position. If Milroe fulfills his ceiling and his taps into all of his upside, he's Lamar Jackson, potentially. Like, I think he has a better arm than Lamar. He can spin it. He's an elite deep ball thrower. It's the intermediate stuff that's an issue. It's a mechanical thing that can be coached up. Seahawks sound like they're committed to working on that, but it's the athletic upside. It's the fact that, I said this last night, I'll say it again. Excuse me. He is going to impact games in 2025. He's going to help the Seahawks win football games in 2025 as your third string quarterback. And if he continues to develop along the way, what a great problem to have if you get to 2027 and Sam Darnold's had a couple of really good years and Jalen Milroe is ready. Plus I look at it this way too. Like, the preseason in the NFL has become such a damn bore the last few years, with starters hardly ever playing and teams being really careful about not wanting guys to get hurt. Quarterbacks hardly play at all, starting quarterbacks. I think we'll see some more of Sam Darnold than we saw of Geno Smith last year, just because new system and everything else, they got to get him some reps. But I think you're going to see a heavy dose of Drew Lock and a ton of Jalen Milroe. I would think he would play probably the whole second half of all three of those games. And while they might rein him in those games, tell him maybe not to take off running just for fear of injury, how fun is that going to be to watch that guy in the preseason? So we haven't had that kind of excitement in a while in the preseason. So I like that. I think it's that'll be fun to watch. Neil makes a great point, and this is what I told the guy today that said it was a wasted pick and could get John Schneider fired. A lot of people were confused when we drafted Russell Wilson after picking up Matt Flynn and paying him at the time. I'd have to go back and do the math, but when you account for the salary cap and inflation between Matt Flynn and Sam Darnold, probably a pretty commensurate or comparative contract that they gave him then to what Sam Darnold just signed for. Like, he was given starter-ish money. And they had Tavares Jackson. And then, the buzz at the time when Russ was the pick was, what are they doing? Drafting a 5'10" quarterback when they just signed a starter in free agency. And then famously, some of the draft analysts gave our draft an F, and Russ was a stupid pick. That turned out okay, right? Well, Jalen Milroe has so much more upside than Russell Wilson did, like just from a physical talent perspective, that I want to try and tap into that. And also, like, I've had people tell me in the last couple of days, like, that pick was dumb. He can't throw. There's some accuracy issues intermediately. It's a mechanical thing. I've talked about it at length. He completed 65% of his passes in his career in the SEC. Don't tell me he can't throw. John McGrath, good to see you, buddy. If Martinez can be 70% of what we had in Lynch, then the Seahawks got the steal of the draft. I love the fact, I talk about playing from behind and working from ahead. That's one position they're working from ahead on, right? Remember, what was it, 2018-19, when we had all those injuries and Marshawn Lynch had to get off the couch and unretire and come play for us down the stretch? They're 5 running backs deep right now. And with Kenneth Walker in the last year of his deal, I said this on Twitter today. I think just from a physical talent standpoint and a run style, I like Zach Charbonnet. I think Damian Martinez might be better. I really do. That's just a fun pick. Neil Marsh says, Milroe plus 3 tight ends and a 275-pound fullback. We are now the tush-push gods. I'm telling you, that's what I was referencing when I said he's going to impact games and help us win football games. He is going to be a monster on third down and in the red zone, I think. And also because, as Schneider said, he was asked, is this Taysom Hill 2.0? Remember when Clint Kubiak was hired and he was asked why the Saints were so good on third down the year before, because that was an area of concern for the Seahawks, and he said Taysom Hill. Well, they use him differently. Hill was more of a tight end, fullback, wildcat guy. When Milroe's back there taking a snap on 3rd and 2 from the 40, teams have to respect the fact that he can throw it and he can beat you deep. And edge players aren't going to beat him to the edge. Linebackers aren't going to beat him to the edge. You can try and spy him, but your linebacker's probably not as fast as he is. And then you put those guys in front of him, right? Maybe, Byron Murphy's been campaigning for getting some fullback snaps, right? But you put Oates in there and AJ Barner at tight end, and maybe you bring an extra lineman in, maybe Michael Jarrell as a 6th. You can do some damage in short yardage. I think that's going to be, fun. Jacob says, I love the draft. I find it funny that if we drafted Milroe at 18, Zabel at 35, and Emenwari at 50, then people would hate the draft. Yeah, they would. Emenwari wouldn't have lasted to 50. I don't think that's why they traded up. But it brings up a good point that we talked about yesterday. That's Seahawk Nerd on Twitter was the one that I want to give credit to for this idea. But he said, if you look at the consensus big board, Emenwari was ranked around 18 and Zabel was ranked around 35. And so if anybody had an issue with that's early for a guard, we'll just flip those guys around. Because so many fans wanted Emenwari at 18, right? And so you can kind of play that game and mix and match a little bit. At the end of the day, I've talked about this for the last 3 or 4 years again. I'll chalk this up as another one of the ways that I think my scouting eye and my philosophy has changed a little bit over the last couple of years. When the draft is over and you just look at the class, I don't care about when guys are drafted. I just care about the class as a whole, how it's going to fit, how it impacts the roster. So let's go back one last time and take a look at that entire class again. Here it is. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. All right, guys. Let me just say a couple of things before I go. First of all, it's been a long week. Spent a lot of time going live and producing content, and you guys have been there. The views have been great. The engagement has been phenomenal. I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate it, and it makes it even more fun for me to do this when you guys are here and bringing your takes and being involved in the discussion. The next week, I literally, as soon as I sign off here tonight, I will be packing up my studio and we are moving across country to our next stop, and it's going to take most of the week. I am going to do what I can to try not to be dark for the whole week. It's just one of those necessities of it's life on YouTube. YouTube doesn't like it when you take time off, but also there's going to be things to react to over the next few days, maybe some signings or roster moves. As we do that, I will, when we arrive, it'll be a little bit more bare bones of a production. I'll just open the laptop and do 10 minutes and give you guys some reactions to things and just post it straight to the page. But then once I get settled, we'll get back into some really deep content again, taking a look at this draft class, taking a look at mini camp, as players start to actually do football things at the VMAC, and some of the feedback that we get and the reports from on the ground with some of the reporters that are regular visitors to this show. I've got some really cool bigger name guests lined up that we've been kind of waiting until after the draft because those guys are so busy. And then we'll just kind of roll on through until we get to training camp. So bear with me over the next week, and we will, we'll see each other when we see each other. In the meantime, follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Seahawks Forever. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit the bell for notification of future episodes, and if you want to support me in the show, you can certainly do that. All the different ways to do that are down below in the description. Until next time, thanks again, you guys. Really appreciate it. I'm Dan. This is Seahawks Forever. Forever and always, go Hawks.